I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons, and eventually I did turn to cannibalism.
This is for you.
Jeffrey Dahmer was an American serial killer and sex offender, born in West Allis, Wisconsin, May 21st, 1960 to November 28th, 1994. When Jeffrey was 8 years old, he moved with his family to Bath, Ohio. Dahmer grew increasingly withdrawn and uncommunicative between the ages of 10 and 15, showing little interest in any hobbies or social interactions. He biked around his neighbourhood looking for dead animals which he dissected at home or in the woods near his home. In one instance, he put a dog's head on a stake. Though fundamentally an outcast at Revere High School, Dahmer nonetheless became something of a cult figure among some students due to his impressions of his mother's interior decorator, who suffered from cerebral palsy. Dahmer began drinking in his teens and was an alcoholic by the time of his high school graduation. In 1977, Lionel and Joyce Dahmer divorced. Dahmer attended the Ohio State University but dropped out after one quarter. Having failed to attend most of his classes, he was drunk for the majority of the term. Dahmer's father then forced him to enlist in the army. Dahmer did well at first, but he was discharged after 2 years because of his alcoholism. When the army discharged Dahmer in 1981, he was provided with a plane ticket to anywhere in the country. Dahmer later told police he could not go home to face his father, so he headed to Miami Beach, Florida, because he was tired of the cold. He spent most of his time there at a hospital, but was soon kicked out for drinking. After coming home, he continued to drink heavily, and he was arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct later in 1981. In 1982, Dahmer moved in with his grandmother in West Allis, where he lived for 6 years. During this time, his behaviour grew increasingly strange. His grandmother once found a fully dressed male mannequin in his closet. Dahmer had stolen it from a store. On another occasion, she found a .357 Magnum under his bed. Terrible smells came from the basement. Dahmer told his father that he'd brought home a dead squirrel and dissolved it with chemicals. He was arrested twice for indecent exposure in 1982 and 1986. In his second offence, he masturbated in front of 2 boys. On September 26th, 1988, one day after moving into his apartment, he was arrested for drugging and sexually fondling a 13-year-old boy in Milwaukee. He was sentenced to 5 years probation and 1 year in a work release camp. He was required to register as a sex offender. Dahmer was paroled from the work release camp 2 months early, and he soon moved into a new apartment. Shortly thereafter, he began a string of murders. Dahmer committed his first murder in the summer of 1978 at the age of 18. His father was away on business and his mother had moved out, taking his brother with her, and Dahmer was left behind. That June, Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks and offered to drink beer with him. Back at his father's house, planning to eventually have sex with him, when Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks to death with a 10-pound dumbbell, striking the back of his head, later saying he had committed the crime because the guy wanted to leave and he didn't want him to. Dahmer buried the body in the backyard. 9 years passed before he killed again. In September 1987, Dahmer picked up 26-year-old Stephen Tuomi at a bar and killed him on impulse. He later said he had no memory of committing the crime. After the Tuomi murder, Dahmer continued to kill sporadically. 2 more murders in 1988 and another in early 1989. Usually picking up his victims in gay bars and having sex with them before killing them, he kept the skull of one of his victims, Anthony Steers, until he was caught. In May 1990, he moved out of his grandmother's house for the last time and into an apartment that later became infamous, Apartment 213, 924 North 25th Street, Milwaukee. Dahmer picked up the pace of his killing, 4 more murders before the end of 1990, 2 more in February and April 1991, and another in May 1991. In the early morning hours of May 27, 1991, 14-year-old Konorak Synthesiphone, the younger brother of the boy whom Dahmer had molested in 1988, was discovered on the street, wandering naked, heavily under the influence of drugs, and bleeding from his rectum. 2 young women from the neighbourhood found the dazed boy and called 911. Dahmer chased his victim down and tried to take him away, but the women stopped him. Dahmer told John Balserac and Joseph Gabrish, police officers dispatched to the scene, that Synthesiphone was his 19-year-old boyfriend and that they had an argument while drinking. Against the protests of the two women who had called 911, who recognised him from the neighbourhood and insisted that he was a child and couldn't speak English, the officers turned him over to Dahmer. They later reported smelling a strange scent while inside of Dahmer's apartment, but did not investigate it. The smell was the body of Tony Hughes, Dahmer's previous victim, decomposing in the bedroom. The officers did not make any attempt to verify Synthesiphone's age or identity, nor locate someone who could communicate with him, and failed to run a background check that would have revealed Dahmer being a convicted child molester still under probation. Later that night, Dahmer killed and dismembered Konarak, keeping his skull as a souvenir. By summer 1991, Dahmer was murdering approximately one person each week. He killed Matt Turner on June 30th, Jeremiah Weinberger on July 5th, Oliver Lacey on July 12th, and finally Joseph Brantoft on July 19th. Dahmer got the idea that he could turn his victims into zombies, completely submissive, eternally useful sexual partners, and attempted to do so by drilling holes into their skulls and injecting hydrochloric acid or boiling water into the frontal lobe area of their brains with a large syringe. Other residents of the Oxford apartment complex noticed terrible smells coming from apartment 213, as well as the thumps of fallen objects and the occasional buzzing of a power saw. Unlike many serial killers, Dahmer killed victims from a variety of backgrounds. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer lured another man in, Tracy Edwards, into his home. According to the would-be victim, Dahmer struggled with Edwards in order to handcuff him, but ultimately failed to cuff his wrists together. Wielding a large butcher knife, Dahmer forced Edwards into the bedroom, where Edwards saw pictures of mangled bodies on the wall and noticed the terrible smell coming from a large blue barrel. The barrel was filled with potent acid which dissolved human bodies to sludge for disposal via the apartment toilet. Edwards punched Dahmer in the face, kicked him in the stomach, ran for the door and escaped. Running through the streets with handcuffs still hanging from one hand, Edwards waved for help to a police car driven by Robert Roth and Rolf Mueller of the Milwaukee Police Department. Edwards led police back to Dahmer's apartment, where Dahmer at first acted friendly to the officers. However, Edwards remembered that the knife Dahmer had threatened him with was in the bedroom. When one of the officers checked the bedroom, he saw the photograph of mangled bodies and called for his partner to arrest Dahmer. As one officer subdued Dahmer, the other opened the refrigerator and found a human head. Further searching of the apartment revealed 3 more severed heads, multiple photographs of murdered victims and human remains, severed hands and penises, and photographs of dismembered victims and human remains in his refrigerator. Dahmer was indicted on 17 murder charges, later reduced to 15. Dahmer was not charged in the attempted murder of Edwards. His trial began on January 30th, 1992, with evidence overwhelmingly against him. Dahmer pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The court found Dahmer sane and guilty on 15 counts of murder and sentenced him to 15 life terms, totaling 957 years in prison, which was the maximum penalty available at Wisconsin abolished capital punishment in 1853. At his sentencing hearing, Dahmer expressed remorse for his actions and said that he wished for his own death. In May of that year, Dahmer was extradited to Ohio, where he entered a guilty plea for the murder of his first victim, Stephen Hicks. Dahmer served his time at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, where he ultimately declared himself a born-again Christian. Roy Ratcliffe, a local preacher from the Churches of Christ, met with Dahmer and agreed to baptize him. Dahmer was attacked twice in prison, the first time in July 1994, an inmate tried to slash Dahmer's throat with a razor blade, while Dahmer was returning to his cell from a church service in the prison chapel. Dahmer escaped the incident with superficial wounds. While doing janitorial work in the prison gym, Dahmer and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, were severely beaten by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver with a broomstick candle on November 28, 1984. Dahmer died of a severe head trauma while on his way to the hospital in an ambulance. Anderson died 2 days later from his wounds.